Today, Empowering Net Zero Professional Practice, Part 1, a meeting of the Working Group 3 of the Professional Bodies Climate Action Charter. My name's John Broderick. I'm the Net Zero Programme Manager at the Royal Society of Chemistry. I'd like to welcome everyone who's joining us online and those in person here in Burlington House in London. This session is part of London Climate Action Week and our own Chemistry Society and the Circular Economy Programme at the RSC. I'd like to thank both bodies, London Climate Action Week and the RSC, for promoting and enabling this meeting to take place. I don't want to stand in the way of our great lineup of speakers, but I do want to mention to everybody who's joining us online that we will be taking questions via Zoom Webinar's Q&A function, and we'll do those all together at the end. But please don't hold back when something occurs to you during one of the speakers. Please jot that down and we'll pass that on to them at the end. Also, just a reminder to everybody that we are recording this session to share with those who can't join us live. So our first speaker will be Nick Mabey, CEO of E3G, the think tank that has been instrumental in establishing the Professional Bodies Climate Action Charter. He'll be followed by Ethny of the IES, who will be joining us by Zoom. And then I'll introduce some of the RSC's work in this area and pass on to Martin Farley of UCL, who will showcase his work in developing a framework to reduce environmental impact in laboratories. Then finally, Martin Baxter of IEMA will introduce the contribution his members make as we move on to discussion. So, Nick, could I invite you to set the scene for us and introduce the Charter?
Cool. So, technological problem there. Great, thank you, and thanks for inviting me to give a few remarks. As I said, my name's Nick Mabey. I'm CEO of E3G, but I also chair the London Climate Action Week steering group, so responsible for trying to make the festival we're running at the moment work, and it's great to have such a lot of different professionals actually hosting events across the week, so it's a great turnout. I'm afraid I won't be able to stay right to the end of Q&As. I've got other events I have to go and talk at, but I wanted to make some opening remarks to really reflect back on what's changed in the context of climate change in the big picture, how that might affect some of the ideas in the Charter and some of the implementation, the role of professionals, and then also how some of the more recent events have changed, I think, the role of professionals and the voice of professionals in the climate world. So where are we post COP26? Well, for those of us who do COPs for a living, it was a different COP because it wasn't really about negotiating a text, though, as always negotiations happen. It was about raising ambition and delivery. And governments did put a lot of targets forward. They increased their targets, so we're much nearer a well below 2-degree future than the 3-degree future we had leaving Paris. So that's a good thing if they're delivered. And there were also a whole set of objectives and initiatives put forward by governments and business, particularly in finance, but in innovation, in infrastructure, in forestry. And again, those would make a big difference if they were delivered. But to be honest, if you were in Glasgow, there was some healthy, some unhealthy skepticism about that delivery and what was happening and the integrity of the commitments and a worry about greenwash. But it has set us up for this big shift in delivery, in monitoring, in engagement. And I think that's where an accelerating market and institutional business changes, of course, that's where professionals are really important. But as the Climate Change Committee report today showed, even in the UK, which has good targets, we're way off delivery. So again, the mantra is delivery, delivery, delivery. But what does that mean? Actually, someone has to be doing the delivering, and it's not just a simple thing. There's no lever you can pull saying decarbonize the economy. Though sometimes I meet people who think there is one. Guarantee you, there really isn't. So how's the role of professionals? There are 3 areas we looked at in the charter, about 3 or 4 areas. The first one is the role of professions in accelerating change and learning, working out those new ways of working. Secondly, governance and integrity. Thirdly, what the focus really of this session is in terms of professional development and workforce reskilling. And also across the whole thing was the voice of the professions, both individually and collectively, in shaping the environment policy, both in government and outside government. So on accelerating change, we've seen some big moves forward. Those of you who work in finance may have seen the Bank of England just did its first stress test with institutions against some scenarios of future climate. There's also been some really interesting work done with the infrastructure industry on incorporating climate risk. The big lesson from that was lots of people are doing things. We still don't know how to do it. we still don't know how to incorporate climate risk into financial infrastructure decisions. And that's a classic cross-profession issue. No one profession covers that. It's one of those areas we highlighted in the charter where joining up across professions is so important. And it's been really interesting watching at London Climate Action Week this year, in areas like law, for example, as the lawyers are taking forward, well, how do you rewrite all the contracts you have in a transition? Because transitioning faster than you were thinking involves breaking lots of contracts, rewriting contracts, working out who gets compensated for contracts, things like that. So we are starting to get to this practical nuts and bolts, but there's obviously a lot of a place to go. And that's where we think this collaboration has real power to drive that forward faster. Because again, where else in the world do you have the concentration of globally important professional organizations than in London? Second sphere is good governance. Yes, there were lots of commitments for net zero in finance firms, but Carbon Tracker just did a 10-year check-up on its report, and it says finance firms in London are still as invested in fossil as they were 10 years ago. And we've also seen, as well as kind of a lack of movement, perhaps a real pushback against ESG. 20 police invading Deutsche Bank to investigate ESG fraud, something I never thought I'd see this year. But again, it was more predictable that the American right would start to push back against woke capitalism and start calling risk management a threat to liberty and market economies. So we've got the sides of professional organizations in America and finance firms going, no, due diligence is due diligence. It's part of capitalism. It's not some strange new thing. But that's what we should expect. As the pressure comes on, we're going to see more pushback, and the role of professionals as arbiters of integrity is going to be incredibly important to back up and help hold the line against the forces of incumbency and ideology going forward. And there's a whole process the UN Secretary General started that issued a consultation this week on how do you produce integrity in non-state actor initiatives, and every professional organization should submit input to that, because it's really important to show that the public that greenwash is not happening, that all these things aren't there. And the last one is continuing professional education, which you're going to talk about later. I think it's very interesting as we come out of COVID, it's been really clear that one, a lot of people have decided to stop working, particularly in senior levels. Others are really looking for purpose. And as a CEO, I talk to other CEOs in the profit and non-profit sector, we're struggling to find talent. In fact, I find it easier to attract talent because I offer more purpose, not because I offer more money. But in London, the GLA estimate they're going to move from 250,000 people working in green jobs to 500,000 by the end of this decade, and they're mostly technical professional jobs. And so it's not just going to be new graduates, it's going to be people retraining. So there is a huge need for skills to come in, as well as but I think also real demand for it. And we get a lot of the other discussions at London Climate Action Week have been from other CEOs of private companies going, this purpose-driven work is what's getting people, is what's moving people forward. So I think that is a huge opportunity to attract people into upskilling into different ways of working and moving forward. Though one note of caution, I would say, is I'm not sure the professions are really in the just transition debate enough. We work a lot with unions. Talking to some senior executives, one particular large car company, saying, I've really got to get rid of all my engineers because they can't handle EVs and digital platforms. And it's like, that's not a just transition. But whereas miners and steel workers and boiler repair people and shop floor workers in car factories have unions batting for them, I'm not sure who's batting for the engineers and the other parts of the sectors, professionals who may be seen as too inconvenient to retrain. And again, we've got a huge demand for skills, so we can't afford just to throw people out on the scrap heap. And so I think that's a real issue. Hearing that professional voice in some of those policy areas would be very powerful. And the last area I want to talk is kind of the new thing. What the professionals, how do they fit in this new, most ugliest neologism soon, the poly crisis? Have you seen that? It's so horrible, I thought I'd say it, just because I thought. But we are in a world, we thought, oh, COVID, we've come out of that. We've got COVID and climate. But now we have Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We've got the economic hangover from COVID. We've got a food and fuel crisis. And for any of you who does macroeconomics, there's a huge debt crisis sitting behind all of that, and kind of because of that and getting worse of it. That's not going to go away. Those reverberations will take ages to come out. And critical to it is that we've invested too much in we focus too much on efficiency rather than resilience. Because efficiency is easy to measure at the bottom line. Resilience requires judgment. Whose job is it to do judgment? It's, again, professionals to say, no, actually, we can't afford to. And the irony, small irony here, is that the money that helped us do the charter convening in the first place came from the Bulb Foundation. a company that went bust because it didn't hedge its exposure to energy prices enough. So again, resilience is everywhere. It's in finance, it's in engineering, it's in accounting, it's in architecture, it's in business systems, it's supply chains, health systems. So I think for me, the big new word going forward is how do we make sure that we redesign all our systems beyond climate to really take resilience in hand, and how come professionals are going to be really critical to that debate? Because it's not just kind of out of old-fashioned forms of accounting or profit maximization. It's going to be much more embedded in quality rather than just quantity of growth. So that's, the kind of challenges things, going forward. So in conclusion, I think professionals, COP26, perhaps the dawning in the minds of political leaders, and certainly they looked slightly scared, which is good because they realize how big this project is. But it's not just a kind of, we'll do a carbon price and the whole of the economy will magically realign itself in 2 decades. So I think that penny has dropped, which is quite useful. It's obvious that professional organizations are already mobilizing in really interesting ways, but the world seems to be moving faster than how fast they're moving. So I think this issue of pace of change, everybody's struggling with. We think you're going fast, but the world requires you to go faster because the tasks, the more we learn, the more we realize we have to do to rebuild the operating system of how society works, and societal expectations on integrity and good governance and professionalism are growing as well, and rightly so, because they expect people to do what they say they're going to do and their investments to be protected and their facilities to be right. So I think there's a huge opportunity to tap into the desire for purpose alongside the huge challenge. And I think that's why I find this so exciting. And if we moving forward is thinking, how do we do that? How do we get the voice of professionals back into the policy debate in the UK in the first place to make sure we bridge the gap of the non-existent policies and actually move forward? And what can organizations like E3G do to help that process? Because again, in the end, you've got the expertise, not us. What we're quite good at is connecting that expertise into where decision makers are. And that's the conversation I'd love to have and follow up after this meeting. So thanks very much for inviting me, and hope you have a good discussion.
Thanks very much, Nick, for kicking that off. Now, are we able to go to Ethny, who's joining us via Zoom?
Yep. Hi, John. Shall I share my screen?
Hi, Ethny. Yes, please do. You're making it into our room, so I assume you're making it around the rest of the world.
Perfect. Hello, everyone, and thanks, Nick, for that for those opening remarks. I'm sorry not to be there in person today. As you can probably hear, after 2.5 years, COVID has finally caught up with me, but I'm delighted to be able to join you virtually anyway for this event. So I'm Communities and Partnership Lead at the Institution of Environmental Sciences, or the IES. The IES represents environmental scientists with specialisms as diverse as marine science, air quality, and land condition, wherever you find environmental science wherever you find environmental work underpinned by science. As representatives of environmental scientists, we are, of course, evangelists for net zero and are therefore staunch supporters of the professional body's Climate Action Charter. We also recognise that our members and environmental scientists in general will be on the front lines of delivering on net zero ambitions and will have their expertise called upon across society to help other sectors in this space. It is therefore essential that as professional bodies, we understand what our members need to be empowered towards net zero professional practice and to provide training and support to enable this. As Nick was saying, we really hold this expertise, or our members hold this expertise, and it's up to us to now get this change moving forward. As was discussed by Nick, the third objective of the Professional Bodies Climate Action Charter is to empower and inspire our members to drive sustainable growth. But in order to do this, we really first need to understand our members' needs and to conduct skills audits. This will then allow us to create tailored support for our members and identify priority areas for action. The ethos behind this is that the change we need is reliant upon systems thinking. Therefore, this work cannot be done in silos. Systems thinking hinges on the ability for communication and collaboration across sectors. Take note of the key words here: jointly, common, and interdisciplinary. This type of thinking is also really important to push forward the just transition, as Nick was talking about. So it's with these thoughts in mind to kind of get this information going, that in the run-up to COP26 last year, the IES conducted a survey of our members exploring their thoughts on net zero ambitions and the skills that will be needed to deliver them. Before we delve into the results of the survey, however, I just wanted to take a quick aside as to the importance of differentiating between knowledge and skills when we're having these conversations. The underpinning knowledge of climate change is obviously foundational to understanding the challenge and to getting us where we are today. However, climate change is now widely accepted as fact, and we need to move beyond the building of knowledge to actually tackle the skills area or the practical application of knowledge in particular situations or contexts. And so this is really now where we need to focus our energy as we move towards enacting solutions. Of course, the conflict implied by the use of verses here is a false one. We know we need both knowledge and skills to solve challenges, but there really is that focus after this COP26 on action and the importance of skills in getting us where we need to go in the next 3 decades. Skills play a really important role in realizing systemic change, as they are the basis through which we interact with the systems around us, and they provide us with the levers that we need to create change. Natural systems and human systems that are intricately interlinked, and skills determine how we interact and influence these systems. So I'll now walk through some of the key findings of the survey. The absolute takeaway headline message to start off with is from the people that took our survey. 1/3 of our members did not feel equipped with the skills to support net zero ambitions. This is really important, as it shows the need for more support in this area, and it's a stark message to us that this needs to be our priority now. So in terms of the actual skills that our members think are important to deliver on net zero ambitions, we actually delineated these into technical and soft skills, as we believe a combination of these skills will be needed. In this context, we're referring to technical skills as the specialized expertise required to carry out specific tasks, and soft skills as skills applicable to all professions, which are related more to how you work. So first, we're just going to focus on those technical skills, and you can see in the word cloud here some of the key things that came up. So a number of technical skills were identified, but the skills relating to carbon emissions calculations, modelling, reporting and offsetting were the most commonly raised, followed by skills in evaluating policy and carbon literacy. Of course, technical skills will vary a lot depending on the specialism. As you can see here, there's loads of different things: transport, decarbonisation, GIS, etc. But there will be areas of crossover where producing more guidance and support could be most beneficial. And that's why professional bodies sharing these results could be a really useful way of identifying these areas of potential collaboration. In terms of soft skills, as you can see here, communication was highlighted as the most important soft skill to support net zero ambitions. This included communication with a number of different stakeholders, from clients to policymakers to the public. Anecdotally, I've had a number of members talk to me about how environmental professionals are being pulled into many different areas now, highlighting the importance of soft skill development, particularly around influencing and communicating to different audiences. It's really important that we do work together on these soft skill implementation, and this is an area which is really easy to collaborate on and which we could have a shared voice in. So next thing to think about is how can we actually deal with these skills deficits? So we were glad to see that providing multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary training opportunities was ranked as the most effective way of addressing skills deficits in organisations. Again, really reinforcing this point of the importance of collaboration across sectors. And you can see here that reskilling and upskilling programs are also a big priority. Other things less so in terms of organisational strategies and hiring new staff. So that focus really needs to be on those multidisciplinary training and reskilling. In terms of the other things raised, there was the need for organisational governance and culture change. So that was in terms of thinking about skills deficits. In terms of the most important skills to achieve net zero, again, the thing that really came up here was these multidisciplinary teamwork skills. There's this understanding that net zero cannot be delivered by a single sector. All sectors need to be involved in this. And so those multidisciplinary teamwork skills were ranked highest. Climate literacy as well is obviously going to be extremely important so that everyone's speaking a common language and understands the foundation of where we're coming from. And then a mixture of the technical skills that we discussed earlier, as well as some of the soft skills like innovation, management, and digital skills. Finally, we focused on the part that I'm sure many of you are here for today. What is the role of professional bodies in all of this? Where can we really add value? And you guessed it, partnering with other professional bodies to deliver collaborative multidisciplinary resources was front and center, along with developing CPD resources to address skills deficits. Obviously, this is well aligned with the Professional Bodies Climate Action Charter and is therefore a key area that we want to accelerate action on. You can see that another key area here that professional bodies hold a unique value in is in their convening power, which is bringing together different stakeholders and exerting influence. This includes, for example, with educational institutions. Professional bodies are quite unique in that they have links to both sides of the sector pipeline, ensuring they can help ensure that graduates are equipped with the skills needed by employers, and they can also assist with upskilling of those already in the workforce, as well as helping to facilitate a conducive policy environment for the net zero transition. By working together, professional bodies can also maximize this influencing power by speaking with a unified voice. Just before I come to the conclusions here, I just wanted to highlight some areas that the IES has been working in this space in response to some of these findings. So in the run-up to COP26 last year, we launched a brand new community or special interest group, which led our activities in the run-up to COP26. These activities were multidisciplinary in nature and were centered around 6 key themes. These were sustainability, transformation, adaptation, green society, economy, and solutions. And this survey was actually done as part of this work. Given the focus on the need for multidisciplinary opportunities and reacting to member feedback, post COP26, the decision was made for this community to transition from a time-limited COP26 community into a permanent climate action community. And this is the first of our challenge-led communities, which aims to bring professionals working across specialisms together around a shared challenge. Another one of our key outputs in the run-up to COP26, which you can see here, is our manifesto for transformative change, which outlines 54 key recommendations for global climate action, as well as the analysis and evidence to support them. We followed this up with a gap analysis, setting out the UK's progress against these 54 recommendations. We really hope to build on these opportunities for members to get more involved in policy activities, as this was raised as a key area of interest, as already discussed in the survey. And finally, what's brought us all here today is that the IES has been partnering with the RSC and the Royal Meteorological Society in pushing forward Objective 3 of the Professional Bodies Climate Action Charter and leading on the working group taking forward those objectives. And there'll be a bit more later on about how you can get involved in that. So in terms of the key takeaways, the main thing I want to highlight is that meeting net zero ambitions is dependent upon transformative change. And it is only through embedding systems thinking throughout decision making that we can achieve this. This means that we need all sectors in the system to play a role and recognise their unique position in pushing forward change. We can no longer rely on incremental change by a few pioneers. This needs to be a concerted effort at changing the system as a whole. And this is reflected in the call from environmental scientists for more multidisciplinary working opportunities. We believe that through collaboration, we can demystify net zero and take tangible steps forwards in realising these ambitions. So this is really a call to action. We need all professional bodies to play their part, and that includes members as well. Each profession holds a little piece of the puzzle for realising net zero ambitions. So if you haven't yet, sign up to the Charter or encourage your professional body to sign up, and let's start getting the ball rolling by going directly to our members, asking what they need, and then highlighting areas of partnership to deliver these. This way, we can bring all the puzzle pieces together and reveal a net zero future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ethny. I hope you're able to stay with us online for discussions and questions afterwards. Super. Austin, can we take back to the PowerPoint here? So, as I said, my name's John Broderick. I'm the Net Zero Programme Manager at the Royal Society of Chemistry. And I'd like to take a moment to introduce a piece of work that we've been doing in a number of teams around the organisation over the last 6 months or so. And that is a survey around sustainable laboratory practice. A little bit of background first. To introduce the RSC, our purpose is to help the chemical science community make the world a better place. And we do that in a broad sense with a community that not just includes our membership of over 45,000 members around the world, but also those who encounter us through our publishing work, through the books and the journals that we produce and the data products that we release, but also those involved in education, through teaching and teachers and training teachers, through the careers resources we produce, the initiatives to support innovative SMEs, and the role we play in having a public voice on policy and matters of concern in public discourse. And it's important to highlight that the organisation as a whole, the RSC, sees sustainability as a cross-organisational priority that's picked up in all of these areas. To give you a couple of examples here on the slide, we signed up to the UN's Race to Zero this time last year, setting a target of net zero emissions by 2040 with a 50% reduction by 2030. And we're doing that through the Pledge to Net Zero established by IEMA and the Society for the Environment. Also to mention a recent piece of work that came out of a previous survey of educators and of young people, the Green Shoots report highlighted how chemistry plays an important role in delivering sustainability, in delivering the skills for sustainability, but also that there are needs and opportunities for change in existing curricula to better facilitate that in future. So we launched a survey in December 2021 of our research community following a COP26 programme panel that discussed the net zero laboratory. And I'm pleased to say that Martin, who will be speaking after me, also spoke on that panel, and you can watch that back on our COP26 playlist if you missed it. But this survey targeted laboratories for the particular reason that they are very resource intensive sites of work and sites where many of our members are based. As we're in London Climate Action Week, I thought I would share a chart from this Hawkins et al. Paper, which drew on data from the display energy certificates of the London University buildings, identifying 17 specific academic laboratories and workshops. And as you can see clearly in this red box, those buildings, those laboratory buildings, are much more energy intensive, both for heating and for electrical demand, than any of the other types of university buildings, including to the left of them, the medical teaching and research laboratories. We're conscious also that not only is scientific research carbon, energy and water intensive, but it produces other sustainability challenges, including in the use and disposal of solvents, reagents, catalysts and plastic consumables, some of which may be contaminated with toxics as well. And so this theme is conspicuous within our community, and our science division councils discuss the need to be doing more in how people do science, to identify the challenges and the barriers and speak to the opportunities that are there to bring this impact down. So before I go on to some of the results, I should say that the sample of our respondents is quite broad. Of the 700, 38, about 40% of our sample were based in the UK, but with the remainder all around the world. And they're not exclusively of our membership, although the majority are, but there are others who encounter us through publishing and events. They represent a breadth of different research fields and a breadth of different situations. So 56% cited that they were involved in academia in some way, as formal kind of academic staff, research students or undergraduate students where they were contacted, 18% in industry and 10% in another educational setting. And again, across a breadth of career stages, the majority being those who are identified as experienced or mid-career researchers. And so this also establishes the potential for significant influence of our membership, or those who have reported here, in that 73% reported that they were involved in running a research group or supervising or overseeing the work of others in some way too. So I'm not going to go through all of our findings. They will be published in a report coming out in September, October time. But the main thing that I would like to stress from the findings is that many of those responding are taking day-to-day actions to reduce environmental impact. And they're taking a diversity of actions. So from on the left-hand side of this chart, nearly 80% are switching off equipment when it's not in use to save energy, and nearly as many closing fume hoods to reduce energy consumption. There are some quite common and regular actions. There are other actions that are less frequent and that might also be something that we would consider promoting or encouraging. So for instance, going out to purchase more efficient models of equipment. I mean, currently that's about a third of respondents say that they always or often do that. The remainder is certainly an area where we could begin to look to improve the efficiency of operations. We didn't just look at closed response questions. We also offered opportunities for open expression and asked about the challenges and the barriers that our respondents found. And they encountered them across a whole range of different variables, from the training that they had or had not received, similar to the responses that Ethny cited, to the infrastructure that they worked in, not being able to accommodate improved measures or equipment, that they found they had limited resources that were too expensive or too time consuming to act more sustainably, that there were technical reasons why they didn't feel that they were able to act in a different way, where there was no obvious alternative, or there was no data, or data was inconclusive to indicate a particular route or path. Some cited organizational influences where they didn't feel able to have a greater impact than their own actions. And finally, at the kind of the largest scale, the scale of the discipline, that research culture with an emphasis on delivering publications was that would be the priority, and at whatever cost or impact. And that wasn't supportive or conducive to reducing impact and emissions. So we see from the quantitative and the qualitative findings that we have a complex set of challenges here that may be contradictory for individuals and that may interact within a particular setting. And it's also very interesting to note that on an overall question of statements about facing challenges, 30% agreed or strongly agreed that they did not face current challenges, and 31% strongly agreed that they disagreed with that statement. And so we see that it is very much not a uniform picture, and that we're going to have to be careful and sophisticated in the ways that we advance this work and the responses. And so what are the next steps for us with this work? Well, we will be reporting on these views in sustainable laboratories in the autumn with a full release of all of our data and findings, quantitative and qualitative. And we'll be discussing these results and taking advice and taking feedback from the strategic bodies that we convene internally to be able to develop a strategic response to this that we can take forward as an organisation. And we're going to continue to work with our member groups to see how we can best enable member-led initiatives that are making progress and that we can share and can act as role models for others to do the same. And so finally, before I hand over to Martin, you can tell us a little bit more about the kind of the concrete reality of making changes in laboratories. I'd like to thank all of my colleagues who've been instrumental in this work, Anne, who's here with us today, and potentially take some questions if you're interested, but also to our respondents and our council members who have provided their time and their insights and their advice as we've been developing this work. Thank you. Martin, yeah, please do come up now.
Hi folks, my name is Martin Farley. Good to see you all today. I work between King's College and UCL, but most of this comes from UCL. And I work around trying to make science more environmentally sustainable. Very quickly, I just thought I'd throw up some figures to give some context. Why are we talking about sustainability in science? We don't know the full carbon emissions of science. We do know there was some very good statistics there from John about the energy efficiency of the buildings. But the overall carbon emissions, the full impact in terms of the plastics and the reagents that he mentioned, we don't know, as he said. We do know that it's around 2% of the world's GDP and around 0.1% of the world's population are scientists. So it's a very high impact, at least in terms of finances. Each ultra low temperature freezer uses as much energy as a house. You remember from the Pfizer vaccine had to be stored in those units. A fume cupboard, we're in chemistry facility, Royal Society of Chemistry. Each fume cupboard uses around 2 to 3 houses worth of energy, which is why those buildings are so resource intensive, of course, the ventilation requirements. And the last stat I find quite interesting is just about the growth rate of science. They were looking at scientific output, so publication and citation rates, and found that scientific output was increasing around 8 to 9% every year, which gives a doubling time of just 9 years. And that was from 2014 study, which I find phenomenal. So science is growing very fast. It's very high impact. We don't know the full impacts. And so it's a high impact area when it comes to the environment. Now, we have some fantastic commitments. We heard about some of those commitments, and the first talk alluded to some of this. The UK's net zero target for 2050, and actually this is fantastic in the UK. UKRI has set a net zero target for 2040. I don't know of another large funder that has set a comparable target. In my mind, this is, it's fantastic to be here working in the UK on this, and NERC is the one who put that together for them. But it's incredible that they have this. And then our institutions have net zero targets. We have one at UCL for 2030, and I'm sure you've heard about the other targets at other institutions of various years and et cetera. There's one at King's for 2025, which I have to admit is maybe a touch ambitious, but it's there. It's good that we have it. Now, the point, I'm not from a professional body per se. I am part of AMIEnvSci, I should say. When I was looking at this in terms of how do we make science more sustainable, the analogy that came up is health and safety. And when HSC wanted to make science safer, they set a central standard and they said you have to work against this. They didn't say everybody go invent your own safety standard and I hope you end up safe. In some ways, that's what we've done with sustainability. We've allowed everyone to set their own targets, and then we've said everybody needs to figure out how to get there. I would argue we need standards. When Sally Davis wanted to improve gender equality in the sciences, she mandated that you had to achieve a silver level in Athena Swan if you wanted to receive funding. It had a great impact. So, we thought actually with the timeline that we have with sustainability, we need something like that in science. And that is why from UCL, I'm working on something called LEAF. LEAF is a standard in sustainable lab operations. It touches on some of the things actually in the survey there that John mentioned. So I'm not going to go through those, but it's got different actions in areas you might expect. One that you might not expect is research quality. I'm just going to mention that one because more of our science is irreproducible than we'd like it to be. And when we think about the resources that go into the science, we have a responsibility to make it as reproducible and impactful as possible. So we have some criteria on research quality. I saw one of the other talks mentioned calculators and assessment of quantification. So we have some calculators in LEAF that allow people to do some estimates. We don't have all the factors that we need yet in this sector. Okay, this is just a slide to brag about LEAF a little bit. It's been online for a year. And we've had 71 institutions sign up, and I think that just shows the appetite for this. There are a lot of researchers, scientists, technical staff, everybody working around science wants to take action around sustainability. They were looking for programs like this. So the National Technician Development Centre have supported us, UKRN, which is the reproducibility network for the UK, have supported this, the criteria around that. And I put the funders up there because they've put LEAF in their institutes, and part of the thinking was that long-term, if be integrated in funding, similar to other. We've got lots of requirements in funding, so that's a long-term goal. So it's grown a lot, and kudos to those who have been involved. The last thing I just wanted to say though was considerations for setting up these certifications. Because I've put maybe quite heavy bold there, must cease to be voluntary, like health and safety. But that's actually what I'm thinking, is that, with the timelines that we have to mandate these things in a sense. We have to make them common. And science has a high turnover. People come and go, and sometimes the good practice goes with them. And it's up to then somebody else to come in to fill that gap. And it's, at the end of the day, it's voluntary. And as long as it's voluntary, we're relying on the goodwill of everybody who's so busy to fit it in with everything else. So I've put some things up there that I think are important, but in doing this work, I've found that, there's a lot of other specialist areas like chemistry labs that are looking to become more environmentally sustainable. I've been working with a program called Green ED, which is supported by RChem, the Royal College of Emergency Medicine. It's essentially A&E doctors who managed to pilot this scheme during the COVID pandemic, which is incredible, 8 trusts that we had involved. And essentially we did something similar to LEAF. We set up a standard on how to be sustainable in A&E, and it's not perfect. We're not net zero A&E sites yet. We're not net zero science. But I think it highlighted the desire to take action in this space and the need for these standards. So, I'm quite excited about where this can all go, but we need to work with more professional bodies and folks like yourselves to advance this and to potentially set these as requirements for fellows that get funding from organizations and such, and to put up mandates and make it less voluntary. So it's the direction long term we could potentially go. That's it from myself. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks very much for that, Martin. Handing over, without too much further ado, to Martin of IEMA.
Excellent. Well, thank you, John and RSC, for hosting us today. It's great to be here and fantastic to follow another Martin. I don't get to do that very often. So I'm Martin Baxter, Policy and External Affairs Director at IEMA. So we're the membership body for sustainability professionals, and really pleased to be able to share some of the insights that we've had from supporting professionals to be able to take climate action. And I think, one thing that is really important from our perspective is that if we're asking our members and others to do things in terms of driving climate action, we have to be able to support that in our own work as well. For us, that's about credibility and our reputation. And so we have to be able to stand there and say, this is what we're doing. So we have, as part of IEMA, we declared a climate and environmental emergency. We helped to establish Pledge to Net Zero. So we were one of the founding partners, and part of that was that we set our own science-based targets, aligned to 1.5 degrees with a 2030 absolute emissions reduction target. And one of our mantras, I think, is when we're speaking to our members about the net zero transition is get used to the word zero and start to kind of use less with the word net. The reality is that the majority of companies and businesses in the world will be absolute zero if we're going to meet net zero, because it's only those that very small parts of the economy and society which will not be able to get to an irreducible minimum, i.e. zero, where carbon compensation offsets and carbon positive is going to be part of the solution. So I think that's a really important thing from us. So an absolute emissions reduction, publishing our performance. And as part of that, we're part of Race to Zero. We're also part of the UNFCCC's Climate Neutral Now. We've been part of UNFCCC in terms of observer status to the COPs for quite a few years, and been speaking at side events there. And I'll speak a little bit about how we try, through our work with UNFCCC and others, harness out the experience that our members have to help to drive and catalyse change at a much bigger scale. I think that's, as a professional body, that's what we want to be able to do. And then we're also part of the professional body's action charter, climate action charter as well, which is around, how do we provide guidance and support to our members? How do we speak with that unified voice? And how do we and empower other people to be part of this journey as well? lots of different initiatives. They all boil down to the same thing: is drive out climate action, do it really, really quickly, share it as widely as possible, and just get on and do it. But there's little bits of reporting and different things. So very quickly, in terms of our own performance, in terms of that, we have been able to significantly reduce our emissions over the last few years. You will see that a big part of that is because we've gone to completely home working. We do quantify emissions from home working, so we've had to restate our baselines, but we are on that journey in terms of our scope 1, scope 2, and in scope 3 emissions. So just in terms of that openness and transparency. For us as an organisation, we've been supporting our members over a long period of time in driving climate action. So this is from 2001, a publication where we were providing guidance to businesses around managing climate change emissions. Very much in that context of new emissions trading scheme coming in here in the UK, questions about climate change agreements, and how do we prepare our members, and just for context, our members work in all sectors of the economy, so from the energy sector, infrastructure, construction, through to financial services, retail, public services, etc. And we have members in many countries around the world, I think about 115 or so. But really, how do you start to quantify emissions and drive that that contribution and that understanding in your organisation? Because of course, if you can't measure it, you don't know where your emissions are. You can't take the action, for example, in laboratories, and understanding where we can actually determine what's effective and drive and accelerate that more quickly. So this has been something that we've been involved in for a long time. Part of our work when we updated this in 2009 was we published a greenhouse gas management hierarchy to help to guide organisations on a journey of reducing emissions. So this was very much led by discussions that we had with our members. So what actions had they been taking? How did they conceive of driving climate action in the organisations within which they work? And how could we bring that to tools and techniques that other people could use and utilise to help to, because I think, professionalism is about sharing and contributing and being part of something. And so as well as, our members doing this, us being able to harness that so that all of our members can share in that, but then how do we catalyse that into broader action for others in society? I've also just put in the guide that we published in 2009 as well on adapting to climate change as well, because I think, the holistic aspects on climate action is that we have to do both. And so we have to be able to support professionals. Nick made the point about, how do we drive resilience into society and our economy? And last summer's Climate Change Committee report, which basically said the climate risks that we face as a country here are growing faster than our ability to adapt and become resilient, is a threat to our societies and communities and businesses. So making sure that we did that. As part of that, that work, of course, it's about catalysing change and using the work that we did with members to drive climate action at much bigger scale. We did a big report on the left with our members to harness their experience about what worked well and what was actually, what are the key ingredients from their perspective in terms of being able to drive climate action. We worked very closely with UK government. It was very unusual actually to have DEFRA policy officials going to Edinburgh, going to Wales and speaking with our members around advice that could be given in this guidance that was published quite a long time ago, back in 2009 again. But this is, how do you drive climate action over a long period of time and work with people? So it's interesting to share that. But also then we worked with the economists in DEFRA to build a model that could then determine the extent to which measuring and reporting on your climate emissions would actually be able to drive emissions reduction, and secondly, would be cost effective. And that underpinned the regulatory impact assessment that led to the change to the Companies Act, which made mandatory reporting of greenhouse gas emissions a legal requirement through that change to the Companies Act. So I think from our perspective, it's using supporting our members to be able to take climate action. It's understanding then what works, being able to then use that into policy insights, which we can help to drive change. Driving change at scale. So I mentioned the greenhouse gas management hierarchy. ISO published a guide on how standards writers of global standards should be considering the integration of climate thinking into that standardization process. Now, ISO has developed over 22,000 standards. There are standards for laboratories, and testing. There are standards for products of all different types and sizes. There are standards for the way in which we manage things and certify things. Okay? So that guide, ISO Guide 84 on climate change, uses our greenhouse gas emissions hierarchy to help to structure thinking for those people who are writing global standards. So I think, in that context, it's about, again, shaping a framework based on the expertise of our members, and then being able to do that. And the guidance for UN climate change, UNFCCC Climate Neutral Now scheme, which we are a part of and are kind of committed to being to doing, but also them showing that on a global scale. Nick mentioned, and collaboration is absolutely critical, and a lot of our members are in that space of having to collaborate both internally because they're working with procurement teams, with design engineers, with operational logistics people, and all different types of people. But what we realized is that a lot of our members are generating the reports that are used by decision makers, whether it's on the left-hand side, the guidance that we published earlier this year on how to assess greenhouse gas emissions associated with new infrastructure projects. Already that guidance has been cited by Secretary of State for Transport, by planning inspectors in kind of determining whether projects that are coming forward are properly now assessing and evaluating greenhouse gas emissions associated with those infrastructure developments, which is absolutely crucial if we're going to be on that net zero transition. We work collaboratively with the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries, because it's one thing to produce the information, but the question is, how do you use it? And so what we did is, working with the actuaries, was provide a guide about how do you use climate change disclosures to be able to make better informed decisions about where money goes. And I think that collaboration between, our members aren't really very good at understanding what the world of actuaries are like. Actuaries don't really know a lot about climate change, but we all know that long-term thinking, long-term change is absolutely at the root of being able to build this into decision-making over a long period of time. And so that guidance really, really helpful. Our Pathways to Net Zero takes an approach about how do you plan this, so really giving support to our members to accelerate change and build it into other systems as well. Back in 2012, I think it was, when the UK published its National Adaptation Plan, actually, it was around, how do you use standards and global standards to be able to drive change? We took on a commitment in the UK's plan to be able to build that into some international standards, and we did that. And then from that, we then described how you could do it more effectively. My penultimate slide is how do you kind of get people? Because I'm quite lucky. Climate change wasn't a big thing when I was doing my education. That's because I'm so old. So I've been able to live through policy developments, regulatory requirements, the development of the science. So it's fairly easy to pick it up as you go because you're part of generating action and helping to drive change. But for new people coming in, then it's really quite challenging and quite tough. So our training programs are preparing people for that net zero transition and to be able to understand that. So helping to develop the skills and capability. And also, as part of this, we recognise that our members and MIEMA as an organisation, as a professional body, we have to be able to help to join the dots. We heard earlier about, how do we support skills acquisition and the development of talent and capability, not just in universities, but in colleges, in FE, in young people coming into the economy, but also that retraining as well. So earlier this year, we published a report with Deloitte about how do you embed climate thinking across all different job families, whether that's in IT, whether it's in leadership, whether it's in technology, logistics, design and engineering. And that's been really useful because that's opened up conversations for our members to be able to be advocates within their own organisations, pushing upwards in terms of leadership and across into those key areas. I'm doing that both in the public sector and the private sector, but also then starting to look about where we have big skills gaps and capacity gaps, where the net zero transition, we don't get the skills right, will not happen. If I give one quick example, because I'm conscious of time, the projection for the UK is that by 2030, we will have something like 10.5 million electric vehicles on the roads. 90% of people will want to be able to charge their electric vehicle from home, not just from home, but out in the public space, because they'll be traveling and they will need to do that. Generally, the thinking is that we will need at least 300,000 public charging points. We've got 30,000 today. But when you look at the skills challenge, we don't have enough qualified electricians to do all the installation work that has to happen ahead of the sale of 10.5 million electric vehicles here in the UK. So if we're going to hit, the Climate Change Committee's report today is a sobering reminder that we haven't got all the policies in place actually kind of being implemented. Well, we cannot have 10.5 million electric vehicles here in the UK. We haven't got charging points to be able to power them. And that requires people, and it requires people in every community around the country to be able to do that, because there'll be home charging points, there'll be public charging. And so the skills challenge around planning both capacity and new skills, because when you talk about hydrogen economy, when we talk about carbon capture, usage and storage, there will be new skills that are needed, and we need to create those. But there's a lot of this is just going to be about capacity and rapidly reskilling the UK population to meet the demands that are needed to accelerate. So I think the Charter is an absolutely fantastic initiative, because it does get us collaborating. Nobody can do this on their own. No one organisation, no one government department, no one professional body. And so to be part of the conversation and sharing our experience and learning from other professional bodies is definitely something that we're up. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Martin. I'd like now to invite up all of our speakers for a quick Q&A session, and also Geraint Northwood from E3G, who's going to be chairing and sharing that. It sounds to me, Austin, is that going out okay? Yeah.
Brilliant. Hi, yeah, so we're just going to go to throw some questions to our online audience and to the audience in the room with us. So I believe we have some that have already been asked, and after that we'll go to the in the room audience.
Okay, so interdisciplinary is a significant challenge for professions, since our higher education system is dominated by single disciplines. Siloed thinking and action is a serious issue for policy on sustainability and its implementation. How professions deal with this issue is critical, and it needs addressing at scale and urgency. Is there a clear and unambiguous pathway that professional bodies can take to support this transition?
I'll be brave and say, no, I don't believe there's a clear and unambiguous pathway, because many of these issues are complex and they're embedded in very kind of specific local circumstances, as well as having some of the more common themes that Martin and Martin mentioned in their presentations. So I think that from a personal perspective, the way I see that we can help people to make progress is to share the expertise and the experiences of those who are making progress in small areas of their own work at present, and provide the skills that can support others to figure out the best responses for themselves in their circumstances. But I don't think that we can start off by saying that we can already identify in advance the most productive ways of working and tackling these multidisciplinary problems. I don't know if either Martin or Ethny would like to disagree.
I wouldn't disagree. I mean, we do see examples where this is starting to work. I think it's tended to be in institutions which are particularly committed. So I've seen examples in nursing where this has been really embedded in a really interesting way. And that's really encouraging, but it's, let's say it's patchy at the moment. It's probably not as advanced as in further education, which I think is really, really important. I don't think it's fully embedded yet in all apprenticeships. So there is work going on to try and green apprenticeships and look what green apprenticeships might be needed, but it's not one of those mandatory things. So come back to Martin's point about compulsion and regulation and driving this. We're not there yet, and so there's a long, long way to go.
I would agree, yeah, with both John and Martin. I don't think there's a clear and unambiguous path. I think collaborations such as the one of the Professional Bodies Climate Action Charter is actually going to be key to this, because what that can help determine is a kind of common language, so that all of the professions can collaborate together to produce resources that that help our sectors move forward in ways that are complementary to each other, and actually provide those forums for sharing of best practice. Because I think the first step is always sharing a common language. When you can speak to each other and understand each other, that's how you then really move forward with these interdisciplinary collaborations that are going to help move forward these actions. So yeah, I completely agree. It's not clear, but we are making our first steps along that path.
Great, thank you for that. I think we now had a question from the back in the audience. And perhaps if you could just say your name and where you're from before you ask your question, that'd be great.
David Griggs, President of the Royal Meteorological Society. Professional institutions, I think, have essentially three roles. One is to put our own houses in order, to make sure that we are walking the talk. The second is to support our members to achieve net zero. And third is to act as advocates and use our professional expertise to provide those skills to other businesses and organizations to achieve net zero. How do you balance those three objectives with the very limited resources that we all have? And how do you prioritize those things?
Tough question.
A great question. In part, this comes back to organizational purpose. So what is it that you're trying to achieve, and how can you best do that? So that's the first thing. I think from our perspective at IEMA, we're conscious that the work and the advice that we might want to push out into the world has to be authentic, it has to be robust, it has to be credible. And so it's the ability to harness the expertise of our members, which is crucial, because that's the underpinning foundation on why we feel able to speak out in the world. We have to, both in the eyes of our members, be credible ourselves. And so there's no way that we could be champions and advocates either of ISO 14001 standard, which we use as the basis, or telling people to go and report on their greenhouse gas emissions if we're not doing it ourselves. So that's just hygiene factors for us as an organisation. It's a difficult one. I'll be honest, because we're a growing organisation, and understanding how we grow and have influence, particularly internationally, in a world where we have a limited carbon budget. I went by train to Germany last month, to Berlin. Our CEO went to Frankfurt to speak and went by train. I mean, it's more expensive. It takes a hell of a lot longer. Leaving at 5 a.m. on a Monday morning and getting home at 1:45 on a Thursday morning is not what is not the easy way of dealing this. It does require you to prioritize. So I think that those two things are really important. But then our members expect us to be shouting because they feel proud to be part of an organisation that is driving change. Because for us, we know that our members are, they're technically competent in the work that they do. They're emotionally connected into the cause of the work that they do. And this is something that, it's really important that we're able to harness and articulate. But passion on its own isn't going to drive change. And so you need to have, it has to be able to stand up as either a business case or the right thing to do from a scientific perspective. So we have to be able to bring that to bear in terms of policymakers and other places that we advocate. So in terms of how we allocate our resources, we try and do everything, and that's why I've got less hair than I should have maybe had or maybe once had, because it is, you get passionate about it and you do as much as you can. I think it does put more demands on us, and we are having to prioritize where we think we will have the biggest impact across all of those three areas. But each of them is mutually supportive, and that's what I think drives success.
I don't think there's really much I can add to that, but to emphasize, yes, using the skills, the expertise, and the multiplication factors of your membership. When we were scoping our program in advance of COP26, dealing with our own carbon footprint is important, but it's not where we saw the greatest impact that we could have. The greatest impact that we can have is through our publishing, it's through our voice and influence, it's through our membership. That multiplies out to be greater than our own impact, which I mean, obviously, as you say, you need to have your house in order to have credibility. They're supportive and mutually reinforcing.
Before I pass to another question, I noticed that we are sort of slightly over time, so I propose that we run until 15:15 with questions. Yeah, great. So do we have another question from the online audience?
We do. So are you thinking we need a minimum standard of sustainability for lab spaces and positive behaviour? And following on, any ideas on how professional bodies could hold those organisations to account and reward positive changes, measuring absolutes rather than relative values, which could cloud the situation?
Yes. I mean, yeah, it's just from the experience of having watched and worked with a lot of labs and how busy everybody's time is and trying to vie for it with sustainability and the voluntary nature of it, that, yeah, we need standards. And I didn't put it up there, but, the guidance is quite important. It's one thing to ask somebody to go do something. The real crucial bit is to provide them the guidance on how to do it so that you can enable them to actually do these things. It's very easy to say we need to reduce single-use plastics. It's very hard to actually reduce them, particularly in a lab setting. So the guidance is absolutely important or crucial for that. So yeah, I think we need the standards. And what was the second part?
How could you reward positive companies that make, or professional bodies that make positive changes?
Well, just, I mean, first of all, the quantification side, we don't actually know how to fully quantify. So, if people see the impacts that they have, it helps motivate, and bring out the passion in the topic. So I think a bit more research is needed in terms of quantifying what the impacts are so people can see that. And to be honest, financially, people save a fair bit of money when they do these things, and often sustainability is viewed as a cost. So, a bit more quantification would, I think, help motivate folks. But
I'd like to add one other thing to that, is to say that we need to be careful with target setting, that we don't kind of get locked into incrementalism. I think something that Martin said that's really important is that we should be planning for getting to zero. We should be thinking about pathways, thinking about the whole transition to a net zero world, because we know scientifically that we have to achieve that point of net zero, or we have continued warming. Okay, so rather than just having standards that are acceptable for now, we need to incentivize the acts of planning for a zero future in all of the different ways that professionals work.
I agree. I think the other aspect of this is opportunity. So from what we see, a growing part of the population, and certainly a growing part of the younger population, are motivated by climate change. They're concerned about it. There's lots and lots of studies that suggest that this is really important to them. And so if as a professional body, and obviously we say ourselves as being part of the centre of this, but all other professional bodies are, in a competition for talent, for having people to choose to take a professional route into a particular domain and to be successful. And to be able to do that, you have to be able to demonstrate, I think, that you're part of the solution and not part of the problem. And so you have to be able to demonstrate how, by taking a professional route, whether it's in chemistry, whether it's in accountancy, whether it's in procurement, that actually you can be part of helping to drive solutions to the challenges that we face. And if you do that as a professional body, then actually you'll be more successful because you'll continue to have a pipeline of professionals who are going to be relevant in a net zero future.
Ethny, you're going to have to just butt in if you have anything to say. Just also going to gently ask the panel to hold the microphone close to their mouths, just as a reminder. Do we have any other questions from the audience in the room? Oh, great.
Thank you. Helen Payne from the Royal Society of Chemistry. I'm going to ask a question actually about our own report on sustainable labs. And what was really noticeable in that chart that you shared was the number of people who didn't know whether they were taking steps to reduce some of the kind of carbon emissions and sustainability. So obviously an underpinning part of that is raising awareness. And how much more work do we need to do to make sure everybody knows the contribution that they can make towards achieving net zero? Because I hear several times people saying, well, there's no point us doing that because we're such a small part, it's such a small contribution. But of course, every little bit is going to add together, and particularly when people aren't quite aware. And I was taken by where we've reported that the calculations that you might choose to run might consume additional energy. So how do we continue to raise that awareness to make sure everybody's contribution is valued and people see that that does contribute to an overall impact?
I mean, I think we did struggle this sometimes with labs. If one scientist sees their contribution, then they think, oh, exactly like you said. But I think the context is really important, and I tried with some of those figures, it makes a difference when you change the temperature in your freezer and et cetera. And just to recognize that you can each do your little bit, and exactly like you said, that setting into context for, a house or a human being, or, and that I think is absolutely crucial towards motivating. And I will say too, is that the awareness, like you said, is so important. And it's really important to set targets and goals and et cetera, and have a certification. But one of the biggest benefits, I just think, is the awareness that comes out of doing something like LEAF. When you walk out, people, they go and they do the good stuff that you say or whatever, but actually they go and do these other things that you haven't thought of, and they start, you enable them to go do much more than you could have hoped for in the beginning. So we just agree that, it's being not too rigid sometimes, particularly in this time when it is voluntary, allows for that innovation that drives some of the biggest successes. And so, yeah.
Sorry, just to put in my piece there. I think it's important to kind of tackle this false dichotomy that exists between systemic change and individual change. So I think it's really important that we try and communicate to people that individual change is actually a key component of systemic change. So what might seem like a small change or something that wouldn't make much of a difference in the larger context is actually absolutely essential in order for pushing forward that systemic change that we're all agreed needs to happen to reach climate ambitions. Sorry, John, over to you.
No, that's a very good point there, Ethny. One that kind of bears repeating again and again, because I think, as Helen says, this is a regular perspective that people do encounter. I think something that we can do is to continue to make this visible at the moment, but move towards normalization. I think our business as usual working lives need to become zero emissions working lives, and we should be talking about getting to that point of it becoming normal as the way we do think and act as as professionals. And I think that's one of the things that the professional bodies really can contribute to is showing that this is the key issue of our generation.
Thank you. We are just running out of time on questions, I'm afraid. So let's perhaps go with one last question. Perfect.
Hopefully a yes, no answer. So I guess, so Liz Bentley, Chief Executive at the Royal Meteorological Society. As professional bodies, most of us have professional accreditation schemes, charterships, registration that we offer to our members. Is there something we should be including within those criteria that stipulate that those that work towards chartership or registration have, taking action against to become net zero themselves as individuals or within their organisation, so we can actually include something that stipulates they should do that?
Yes.
Qualified, we should figure that out, what that is and the content of what that is, but we should certainly be working on that question.
No surprise that we build it into our assessment processes, but that's because that's the work that our members do. So that's cheating, really.
Same with us, of course. It's already inbuilt in our systems, but I would be strongly supportive of it being built into other chartership schemes as well.
Great, thank you, everyone. I think I'm now just going to wrap up for us. So if we could switch back to the last slide on the PowerPoint, that'd be perfect.
And in the room audience for those questions and for being here. And of course, to our speakers who have been, I've learned a lot, which I have been involved with this from the start, and yet there's still so much to learn about. It's been really interesting today. And thank you to the Royal Society of Chemistry for providing this wonderful venue for us, which has been a very comfortable place to have this discussion. So just to conclude on the main points of this discussion, Working Group 3 did such a fantastic job of bringing this together. And Working Group 3, their mandate really is to empower and inspire the members of the professional bodies that are signatories to the Charter. And I think that's, they've shown that that's what they're doing at the moment. So by members, we mean the individual professionals within the professional bodies. And really, that is one of the key aspects of the Charter, is that it should be member driven. I think we've shown how that's taking place, firstly through this survey. So the surveys that the RSC and the IAS have been doing, and which we hope to start with the rest of our signatories, moving, on the next sort of step of action following this meeting. Yeah, it was really nice to see actually that a lot of the views of the members agree with the other principles of the Charter. And that, I think that the survey results that we've seen so far, it's clear how those will feed into the work of the other working groups, which include, Working Group 1, who are working on the action plans for our signatories. So the action plans that professional bodies will take forward in, empowering their members through whatever means. We've talked about various things, including sort of codes of conduct and things that are more mandatory, as well as the sort of softer and more supporting approach, such as CPD resources and education. And Working Group 2, Martin Baxter talked about how the expertise of the members should feed into policy, and that's really the role of Working Group 2. But as well as front and centering the views of the members, this Working Group 3 will be moving forward in the future to taking those results identifying the gaps in resources, tools and principles that members need, and gathering those where they already exist and developing new ones on an interdisciplinary basis. And finally, as goes along with their title of learning and sharing, they'll be learning about and sharing how signatories to the Charter are reducing their own emissions to inspire members and each other. And we're very lucky to have AMIEMA and the Society for the Environment as supporters and signatories to the Charter who run Pledge to Net Zero, and we're looking forward to learning from them and working with them on that. So just finally, how anyone listening can get involved. Well, if you're a staff member of a professional body that's a signatory or a supporter to the Charter, there is a meeting on the 9th of August at 2 p.m. and which is open to anyone who wants to help with the work of Working Group 3, contribute. And that will probably be mostly on how to get surveys out, how to support other signatories to the Charter on surveying their own members and how to create those surveys. And you can, if you're interested, that information will go out to the mailing list, but also my email address is there. And if you're not a staff member, if you're not yet a signatory, you can find our website at the bottom there. And if you're a member of a professional body, but perhaps not a staff member, you pester your professional body to get involved. And I think the only thing that remains is to thank our speakers, our audience, and RSC again for being here.